This piece of bread has a longer shelf life than you will. Roman soldiers marched 18 miles a day on it, in full armor, carrying 60 pounds of gear. Viking raiders crossed the open Atlantic with it stuffed in their packs. Civil War soldiers survived 4-year campaigns eating almost nothing else. This bread didn't expire in 3 weeks. It didn't expire in 3 years. Documented military records show verified batches still edible after a century in storage. So here's the question. Nobody in the food industry wants you asking. If they already knew how to make bread that lasts 100 years, why does the loaf in your kitchen go moldy in 10 days? The answer goes back 3,000 years. And it isn't just about bread. It's about an entire category of foods. Ancient, indestructible, nutrient-dense foods that have been quietly erased from the modern diet. Foods that sustained armies, fed civilizations, and kept people alive through famines and wars without a single preservative or refrigerator. Most people have never heard of these foods. And that is not an accident. There's actually a book, compiled from over 2 years of historical and nutritional research, that documents over 126 of these lost foods. The ones that kept humans alive for thousands of years before the modern food industry quietly replaced them. I'll tell you more about it in a few minutes. But first, let's go back to where this story starts. The oldest bread ever discovered is 14,000 years old, found in what is now Jordan, a charred flatbread, made from wild grain, water, and nothing else. No commercial yeast, no additives, and archaeologists confirmed it was intentionally made, meaning humans figured out bread before they figured out farming. That's how fundamental this food is to human survival. But the bread that actually sustained civilizations, that fed armies, launched expeditions, and won wars across 3,000 years of human history, wasn't soft. It wasn't fluffy. It didn't come in a plastic sleeve. It was hard, dense, almost indestructible. The Romans called it bucellatum. Sailors called it ship's biscuit. Civil War soldiers called it pilot bread. But the formula was nearly identical across every culture and every century that relied on it. Flour, water, salt, baked twice. That's the whole recipe. And we will come back to the exact original method before this video ends, including a fermentation technique that most people have completely forgotten. Keep watching. Let me show you exactly what this bread could do, through 3 armies that history has never forgotten. Rome first. At peak expansion, the Roman legions were the most effective ground force the ancient world had ever produced. A single legion covered 18 miles of terrain every single day, for weeks without resupply. Their primary ration was bucellatum, a twice-baked grain biscuit, hard as compressed stone, virtually waterproof. The Byzantine military manual Silage Tacticorum documents soldiers carrying enough to survive 17 days independently. 17 days of food, in a pack. That didn't rot. The Vikings next. When Norse sailors departed for the North American coast around 1000 AD, the crossing took 3 weeks minimum. Open ocean, no ports, no resupply possible. Historians analyzing longship archaeological sites found evidence of grain biscuits specifically double-baked for the voyage. No refrigeration, no chemical preservatives. The bread didn't need them. The process itself had already made it shelf-stable. Then the Civil War. By 1861, hardtack was so central to Union Army survival that soldiers gave it its own slang. Tooth dullers, sheet iron crackers. They hated it. They complained about it constantly in letters home, but they survived on it, and quartermaster records confirmed that biscuits produced at the start of the war were still being issued 4 years later. Same batch. 4 years, still edible. Your grocery store bread has a sell-by date of 10 to 14 days. Some brands less. So what exactly changed, and who changed it? The answer is 1961. And a laboratory in Chorleywood, England. That year, the British Baking Industries Research Association unveiled something they called the Chorleywood bread process. Their stated goal was efficiency. Traditional bread required long fermentation, 12 to 24 hours, where wild yeasts and bacteria slowly broke down the grain. That process built complex flavor, yes, but more importantly, it built a biological structure that naturally resisted spoilage. Chorleywood eliminated that entirely. Using high-speed mechanical mixing, synthetic enzymes, and fast-acting commercial yeast, they reduced production time to 3.5 hours, wheat to shelf. The food industry called it a breakthrough. It was cheaper. It scaled to mass production overnight. Within a decade, it had spread across the United States. What they didn't advertise was what they had quietly cut out: the fermentation, the bacterial process, the slow conversion that ancient bakers and Roman army supply officers had depended on for centuries. Because here's what fermentation actually does to bread. First, it pre-digests the grain. The bacteria break down phytic acid, the compound in raw grain that actively blocks your body from absorbing zinc, magnesium, and iron. Traditional fermented bread unlocks those minerals. Chorleywood bread locks them back in. Second, fermentation produces lactic and acetic acids. These are natural mold inhibitors. They're the biological reason sourdough sits on your counter 3 times longer than standard sandwich bread without going bad. Third, the slow bacterial process restructures the gluten network in ways that no mechanical mixer can replicate. The result is a crumb that stabilizes over time rather than degrading. Take all of that out and you get a loaf that rises in 90 minutes, photographs beautifully for packaging, and requires a cocktail of synthetic chemicals just to survive its own shelf life. Every loaf you have bought in the last 20 years went through a version of this process. You paid for the chemistry experiment. You just weren't told what you were buying. Pull up the ingredient label on almost any commercial sandwich bread in America right now. You'll find calcium propionate, sodium stearoyl lactylate, datum, monoglycerides and diglycerides, and azodicarbonamide. That last one is a dough conditioner approved for use in American bread. It improves elasticity. It speeds up processing. It is also the same base chemical used in the manufacture of yoga mats and shoe soles. It has been banned as a food additive in Europe, Australia, and most of Asia. It is still in your sandwich bread. The Roman buccellatum formula had 3 ingredients: emmer, wheat, water, salt. It needed nothing else because the process made it shelf-stable. We replaced 3,000 years of food engineering, tested across the toughest conditions human beings have ever survived, with a chemistry experiment optimized for profit margins. And this isn't just bread. The same pattern repeated across dozens of food categories throughout the 20th century. Ancient fermented foods, nutrient-dense preservation methods, wild harvested superfoods that humans relied on for millennia, systematically replaced by cheaper, faster, industrially optimized substitutes. The people who still know about the originals are not in commercial food production. They're researchers, historians, people who went digging through old texts and military records, and ethnobotanical archives and asked the same question you should be asking: what did they know that we've forgotten? That is exactly what the book 126 Plus Lost Superfoods documents. Over 126 foods, preservation methods, and nutritional systems that fed civilizations for thousands of years, compiled from historical research and largely absent from modern dietary knowledge. Bread is just the beginning of what's in there. I'll link it in the description, and if what you've heard in this video concerns you at all, it is worth reading cover to cover. Now, the original formula. Basic Hardtack. The Civil War military version: 2 cups of flour, half a teaspoon of salt, half a cup of water. Mix until the dough is stiff and dry, not sticky. Roll it flat to about 1/3 of an inch thick. Score into squares. Punch rows of small holes across every piece with a fork. This prevents air pockets and ensures even drying through the full bake. Bake at 375 degrees for 30 minutes. Flip every piece. Bake another 30 minutes. Pull them out and let them cool completely before sealing. Stored in an airtight tin in a cool, dry place these last years. That is the baseline. That's what kept the Union Army alive. But the version Roman soldiers were actually eating had one extra step, a fermentation stage before the bake. You mix equal parts flour and water, leave it uncovered in a warm spot for 24 to 48 hours, and let wild airborne yeasts colonize the mixture naturally. That starter becomes your dough base before rolling. The bake then locks in everything the fermentation produced: the acids, the broken down phytates, the restructured gluten network. This is ancient sourdough technology. It is not complicated. It doesn't require equipment. It requires the one thing the modern food industry decided wasn't profitable: time. The knowledge of how to do this and how to do it with over 100 other foods that the industrial system replaced or erased is exactly what 126+ lost superfoods preserves. It's not a recipe collection. It's a record of what humans actually survived on, and proof that most of what the food industry sold us as progress was a trade most of us never agreed to make. Link is in the description. The bread that fed Rome didn't need a label. The bread that crossed the Atlantic didn't need preservatives. The bread that kept men alive through 4 years of war needed 3 ingredients and a process the modern food industry decided wasn't worth keeping. You were never told what got taken out. You were just handed the replacement and called it an upgrade. Now you know what was in the original, and you know how to make it. If this made you see that bread aisle differently, share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more of this, the forgotten foods, the buried methods, the things that got quietly retired while nobody was watching, subscribe. I find these every week.